Washington is looking at this as we're trapped and pinned, and tomorrow morning they're just going to annihilate us. And it was a miracle that they escaped to live another day. It's just unbelievable because of the river, because of what God did. Hey, welcome back to Luso, a show about our great country and just unpacking the God stories from the American Revolution. And granted, this show would be nothing without coffee. So dilly dilly, or here, or cheers, however you might say it, because I'm drinking coffee. Well, if you're not listening to the other shows and episodes, and as a matter of fact, if you're listening online, you might not see the cake that we have right here. We have this cake. 250th anniversary of our nation is coming up, and we're just unpacking what was God going on, what was going on in 1776, what was God doing, in particular, what was God doing, because I don't think anybody else out there on the internet is actually talking about that. And we believe it's really important to actually teach the next generation. For those of you out there that think, man, our country is going to hell in a handbasket, what is going on? Why does the American flag seem to be an offensive symbol in our own country? Well, maybe that's because they don't know anything about the American Revolution, why we fought for these freedoms, why we have liberty, why liberty is important to us. So that's what we're talking about. Hey, we're just talking about what God was doing, because I believe is way more than men. Our founding fathers are great people. I love what they did, but I think it was God who was doing something extraordinary in and through them. And that's what we're here talking about on this show. So, hey, I like to talk about a couple of books when I'm on here. I love reading books. I wrote a book about my ancestor from the American Revolution, but I also, if you've been watching our shows, you've seen me plug this book. This book, 1776, is an award-winning book that came out over 20 years ago. HBO has had the film rights of it for 20 years with Tom Hanks, and they have done nothing with it. Nothing. Now, I think that our nation's 250th anniversary next year would be the perfect time to release. Hey, maybe it's not the whole book, right? I get that, but maybe it's just like one story that you zero in on. I mean, Hollywood's Hollywood. They could do it if they want it, but they're not. So, hey, so we're over here talking about it. You know, look, that's why you're here tuning in the show. And a little plug about my book that I wrote, since I did mention that. So, Luso, it's a word that means a person of Portuguese descent, or a prefix. So, check that out. Go buy the book. That's my shameless plug. But we're talking about another God story, and that is the river. So I'm going to call this one just simply the river. When you look at some of the other, if you go listen to all the shows, you see some of these stories that I'm talking about are things that only God could do. Only God. So if you think of just the natural elements that we live with, whether it's, rain, fog, ice, sleet, storm, whatever, storms, a river is another one that God made, man didn't make that. And I live in North Carolina, and last year, I'm just going to kind of give it a story that relates. It would hit national news, but a storm came in and turned the rivers out in western North Carolina into just a disaster. And I mean, just a horrific disaster, just a flooding that North Carolina has never seen before. And it was national news. And so you just saw houses floating down the river. You've seen this with other hurricanes and things like that. But my point is, behind the river and this miracle of the river is that God is the one that puts the river into place, or a stream or a creek or whatever. And he's the one that put that there, not man, not us. And God could do something extraordinary with it. So if you listen to the show yesterday, I was talking about George Washington's crossing and the ice. And so that was yesterday. Well, chronologically here, just what, if you're not familiar with the American Revolution, hey, studies show 83% of Americans don't even know why we fought the American Revolution. So I'm trying to do this chronologically. And so if you listen, Christmas Day of 1776, that was George Washington's crossing. You've probably seen that iconic picture of him, Washington on top of the boat or whatever, the front of the boat. And so that's what we talked about yesterday. Well, about 8 days later, January 2nd now of 1777, George Washington's men have now, they had a success of surprising the British in the middle of the night on Christmas Day. But 8 days later, they're exhausted. Mind you, they don't have shoes. A lot of the guys have just rags on their feet. It's the winter time. Okay. Just remember that. They're walking through snow and all that kind of stuff. I mean, just, it's crazy to think what they endured for you and for me. I mean, truly. So we got to remember that. That's the part of gratitude that we need to have appreciation for what they did. So here we have January 2nd, and George Washington's men are essentially pinned after the Second Battle of Trenton. Again, you had the British and the Hessians, the world's strongest army, and they're just wearing out Washington's men. And on January 2nd, that evening, as dark is falling, they have them trapped and pinned at Assunpink Creek. I hope I'm saying that right. For you guys that live in Jersey and around the Trenton area, if you live in Jersey, mention below if I'm saying this right, but Assunpink. And so Assunpink Creek, it's a creek still today. I haven't been to it myself, but I think it's probably smaller and narrow today. But like I mentioned yesterday, the Delaware River was probably wider than what you see today. I'm thinking this creek is probably the same. It's a wider creek. So again, it's the middle of the wintertime. It's January 2nd of 1777, and it's a frozen creek. Now, Washington is looking at this as we're trapped and pinned, and tomorrow morning they're just going to annihilate us. And the British are like, yes, this is great. We'll get home, and everything will be just fine and dandy, and we won't have to worry about these little ragtag farmers anymore. But God had a plan. That's what's wild about this. God had this crazy plan. So what we see is, in the middle of the night, George Washington is looking for a way to cross the creek. Assunpink. Make sure I'm saying that right. Assunpink. Anyway, he's crossing the creek, okay? Creek in Trenton. So they're looking at this creek and realizing there is no way that we could get our cannons across this creek, and especially without the creek, the ice, there's thin ice on it, and the thin ice is going to crack, and just a few hundred yards away are the British, and they're going to hear it, and they're going to come over and just annihilate us in the middle of the night because they'll know that we're escaping. So as they're looking at this creek and looking for a place to escape, what initially looks like thin ice, they find one patch on the river, one patch that's hard enough that they could cross their men and their horses and their cannons off to safety and get over to Princeton. So Princeton is still there today. You can go check that out. And again, like I said, the creek is probably wider back then, but they find this invisible bridge. I mean, really, like out of nowhere. The eyewitness accounts was like, where was that before? Like, they find this in the middle of the night, and so Washington quietly, discreetly is able to get his guys across. And if it had been thin ice, it would have cracked. And again, like I said, the British would come charging and just annihilated them in the middle of the night. But that wasn't the case. They escaped, and it was a miracle that they escaped to live another day. It's just unbelievable because of the river, because of what God did. God put this invincible bridge there. Well, I say river, but it's really the creek, right? But what God was doing there, it creates this invisible bridge, is extraordinary. And most people don't know this miracle that took place. A miracle right after George Washington's crossing on Christmas Day. Only 8 days later, they're about to just get wiped out by the British and the Hessians. And miraculously, God intervenes. I think that's extraordinary. And the report is that General Cornwallis from the British Army, later says that the rascally fox, he gets away again. I don't know. I'm sure he's saying it a different way. I'm trying to give you my little British intake. It's not working, but you know what I'm saying. He claims he's like, the fox gets away again. Well, how is it that the fox, George Washington and his guys, get away? And all you can say is God, right? That's all you can say. All you can say is God intervened, and we have this great country today. That's what's wild about it. And matter of fact, if you go look at the history, so they cross over to Princeton, and then they win another battle, and it just invigorates the Continental Army, who's, again, a ragtag army. Some of them don't even have shoes. Many of them, by that point, had run off and deserted. But the ones that were there were like, God is doing something extraordinary. And so they continue on in the fight. Thank God that they did, because we have this great country today. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Hit subscribe below. But more than that, click the link below, Luso.tv. Watch our short film. That's how you can really help us. Together, you and I, we can educate 83% of Americans that don't understand why we fought the American Revolution. But I need your help. We need your help. So share it with your friends. Pay it forward. Send it to 1,000 of your friends. Okay, maybe 100, 10 of your friends. Pay it forward. Click the link, luso.tv.